He forgot the one day I asked him never to, my mother's death anniversary. Instead he threw a party, for the woman he betrayed me with. They thought I'd break. But I learned to stay silent, to smile, and dismantle everything they built brick by brick. This isn't about revenge. It's about remembering who you are when they forget you. I always imagined the end of my marriage would be quiet. Maybe a tear-stained letter left on a kitchen table, or a final conversation held in hushed voices under dim lights. I never pictured it ending with lobster claws flying across a marble floor and an antique wine glass crashing into a $10,000 centerpiece. But that's the thing about betrayal, it doesn't come dressed in whispers. It crashes in with applause, red wine, and my husband holding the hand of the woman who once called me her best friend. And her birthday? Just happened to fall on the anniversary of my mother's death. How poetic. It started that morning. "Elena, wear something soft today," Julian said, flipping his cufflinks with one hand and checking his reflection in the mirror with the other. "You always look stiff in black." I blinked slowly from the bed. "It's the color people wear to cemeteries, Julian." He looked at me like I'd just told him I planned to join a cult. "We're not going to a cemetery today." "No," I replied, biting down the nausea crawling up my throat. "We're going to Tessa's birthday party." Julian adjusted his tie, completely unfazed. "She's making an effort to fix things." "She's your family now." Family. That word had never felt more perverse. Tessa Reed was once my classmate, then my father's mistress, now his wife. A 27-year age gap, and one funeral later she sat smugly in my mother's place, wearing her jewelry, redecorating her house, and now apparently inserting herself into my marriage too. I slipped into a simple navy dress. I didn't do it for Julian. I did it for the cameras that would inevitably be flashing all over the private ballroom of the Marigold Grand Hotel. She always chose that venue. Probably because it was the same place my father had taken my mother every anniversary, before he stopped coming home at all. The room smelled like orchids and expensive gilt. The kind only women like Tessa knew how to wear like perfume. She stood at the head of the table, wrapped in a pale lavender gown with diamonds dripping from her collarbones like frost. Her hair was curled, cascading down one shoulder like she was starring in a shampoo commercial. The moment we walked in, she turned with practiced surprise. "Elena," she purred, stepping forward with a flute of burgundy wine. "I'm so glad you came." My hands clenched into fists. Not because I hated her, though I did, but because she looked exactly like she had at my mother's funeral. Flawless, composed, glowing with victory. Beside me, Julian nudged me forward, his hand gently grazing my lower back. I didn't move. Tessa's eyes sparkled. "Let's put the past behind us, shall we? This toast is for new beginnings." She extended the glass. Julian did the one thing I never thought he would do. He took it from her hands and offered it to me. Like a peace offering. Like he thought this would fix everything. "Elena," he said quietly. "Please." A beat passed. Then another. I smiled. White. Gleaming. The kind of smile that looks pretty right before an explosion. I reached out, not for the glass but for the edge of the table. And with a single deliberate motion I flipped the entire thing. The crash echoed like a gunshot. Plates shattered. Lobster tails flew through the air. Red wine splattered across a $5,000 ivory tablecloth. Tessa shrieked as liquid splashed across her gown, clutching at her diamonds like they were on fire. Gasps erupted around the room. But I didn't care. I looked Julian in the eye as the chaos unfolded around us. "You brought me to a celebration on the day my mother jumped from the 18th floor because of that woman." "Elena." He stepped forward, aghast. I stepped back. "You dragged me here. You made me stand in front of the woman who broke my family apart. And you thought handing me a glass of wine would make me forgive her." Tessa tried to intervene, feigning embarrassment. "Elena, darling, let's not." "Don't call me that," I snapped. I turned toward my father, who had been silent up until now, content to let his new wife handle the performance. He looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe older. Or maybe the rot of what he'd become had finally caught up to his appearance. "Do you even remember what day it is?" I asked him, my voice steady. He blinked. "It's Tessa's." "It's the day Mom died," I interrupted. "The same day she begged you to stay home and you didn't." The silence was absolute. I reached for my clutch and walked out of the ballroom, heels clicking against marble like gunshots. Julian followed, of course, Elena, wait, he called. You didn't have to make a scene. I stopped in front of the elevators, pressing the button calmly. No, Julian. I had to. Because if I didn't, I might have choked on all the dignity I've swallowed over the past 3 years. By the time I returned to my grandmother's house, the sky had turned a dull, angry gray. Fitting, really. Come in, she said gently, stepping aside as I hauled my suitcase through the doorway. I placed my shoes neatly by the door. The same way I used to when I was 12, hiding from the storm of screaming adults behind me. I collapsed into her kitchen chair, staring at the familiar wood grain table, and laughed softly. It happened again, Grandma. She didn't ask what. He knew. I married a man who only weighs logic and image. Never emotion. Never loyalty. My grandmother slid a bowl of fruit toward me. I peeled a honeydew melon slice and placed it gently into her mouth. I told you, I said, resting my head against her shoulder. You picked a scumbag for Mom. And now you introduced one to me. I didn't leave Julian right away. Not officially. But that was the night I stopped being his wife in anything but name. And Tessa? She may have thought she'd won the battle that night. But I had just declared war. The morning after the birthday disaster, I woke up to the smell of jasmine tea and the soft rustling of newspapers. My grandmother's morning ritual. She sat at the head of the dining table, reading with her glasses perched at the tip of her nose, while I stared blankly into a bowl of oatmeal I hadn't touched. Elena, she said without looking up, your name is trending on social media. I didn't even blink. Let me guess. #Lobstergate? She smirked. #the toast you didn't take. I allowed myself a quiet laugh. At least they got that part right. I didn't bother checking my phone. I already knew what I'd find. Photos of the party, speculation about our marriage, and Tessa's crocodile tears in high resolution. She'd always been good at playing the wounded stepmother. The public would eat it up. That is, until I started feeding them something far more appetizing. I took a bite of oatmeal and calmly said, I need your safe. My grandmother finally looked up. The old one or the locked one? The locked one. Without another word, she got up, shuffled into her bedroom, and returned a moment later with a small brass key. Do what you need to do, she said, placing it in my palm. But don't forget to live after it's done. Inside that safe were 3 years of silent planning. Photos, documents, screenshots, and a USB drive labeled simply Blake Reed. Proof of Julian's casual disregard for my boundaries. Evidence of Tessa's slippery fingers inside my father's company. Bank statements that traced expensive gifts from Julian to stores Tessa frequented. Keychains, scarves, jewelry, even a luxury watch that matched the one she flaunted last week. Somewhere between wife and war general, I had quietly become a record keeper. And now my war had begun. Later that afternoon my phone rang. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Elena, came Tessa's sickly sweet voice. I've been trying to reach you. I stared out the window at my grandmother's hydrangeas, blooming like nothing in the world was falling apart. I blocked you, Tessa. What gave you the impression I wanted to talk? She laughed, soft and condescending. I know you're upset about last night, but I only asked Julian to bring you so we could talk. Honestly, the party was just an excuse. To force-feed me forgiveness? To fix things, she corrected, her tone syrupy. We're family. My throat tightened, but I didn't let it show. No, Tessa. You're a parasite. You latched onto my father, tore my family apart, and now you want my husband too. Elena. Don't, I interrupted. Don't pretend you don't know what you're doing. Her voice changed, sharper now. Whether you like it or not, I'm legally your stepmother. And I'm not going anywhere. I smiled coldly. Then brace yourself. Because neither am I. I hung up. And blocked the new number. That evening, I sat with my grandmother again, organizing the files on my laptop while she watched a rerun of an old cooking show. Do you remember the day you moved in with me after your mother died? She asked suddenly. I paused, then nodded. I remember the silence in the car. Dad didn't even look back. My grandmother exhaled slowly. That day you asked me if love always feels like being left behind. What did you say? I said no. I turned toward her. Were you lying? He gave me a long look, then smiled. Yes. But you needed to hear it. Julian called 5 times that night. Then he texted. We need to talk. Then. Don't run away from this, Elena. I stared at the screen and almost laughed. I wasn't running, I was building, stone by stone like a fortress with his name etched in the foundation. Instead of replying, I opened my email and attached all the evidence I had gathered. Recipient: Raymond.read@readgroup.com. Subject: Your wife has a second job, seducing mine. Sent. 2 days later, Julian showed up at my grandmother's front gate. Don't let him in, I told her. She peeked through the curtains. He brought lilies. Tell him I'm allergic. She laughed. You're not. I am now. She went outside and spoke to him for a few minutes. When she came back, she placed the flowers on the kitchen counter and said, He looks confused. Like someone just told him the sun doesn't rise in the east anymore. I shrugged. Good. Let him stand in the dark for once. The next bomb dropped over dinner when I logged into our shared cloud storage. Among the folders labeled Home Renovation and Vacation Plans, I found one innocently titled Miscellaneous Receipts. Inside were scanned copies of gift purchases, high-end bracelets, silk scarves, and perfume, not from brands I liked but brands Tessa always name-dropped. One receipt in particular caught my eye. A bracelet. White gold. $14,800. Julian's note in the margin. Tessa's birthday. She'll love it. My hands shook. Not because I was surprised, but because he didn't even bother to hide it. That night I didn't sleep. Instead I wrote a list. Not of his sins, I already knew those by heart, but of everything I'd sacrificed. I gave up a lucrative job offer in San Francisco to be his support system while he launched his firm. I hosted his family's endless brunches, smiled through every one of his cold apologies. I gave Tessa the benefit of the doubt more times than I could count, but I never gave myself an escape. Till now. When the sun rose the next morning, I had made my decision. I'm filing for divorce, I told my grandmother over toast. She didn't blink. I know, she said. I was just waiting for you to admit it out loud. I'm not going to tell Julian yet, I added. Not until I file formally. She reached over and squeezed my hand. Good. Let him read it the way he read your vows, late and with no intention of understanding them. In that moment I realized something. Tessa might have taken my father. She might have married into our money, stolen our home, and ruined my mother's life. But me. She underestimated me. And Julian? He thought I was his peace. But I'm the storm. Julian called 5 times that night. Then he texted. We need to talk. Then. Don't run away from this, Elena. I wasn't running. I was calculating. By morning the divorce petition was filed. Publicly. Not out of pettiness but precision. A sealed copy went to Julian's firm. An unsealed version landed in 3 inboxes belonging to reputable media outlets. I didn't want quiet separation. I wanted a signal. Let the world know. The wife was done and the war had begun. Julian didn't call this time. He showed up. Late afternoon, same navy jacket, same expensive haircut. Same man who thought my silence was a loyalty he owned. He stood on the sidewalk outside my grandmother's garden gate holding something. A bouquet maybe. I didn't look closely. I watched through the curtains unseen. He paced. Waited. Still thinking this was temporary. Still thinking I'd cool down like I always did. He didn't know yet that I'd never felt colder in my life. Not frozen but forged. Something had clicked inside me finally. This wasn't heartbreak. This was clarity. And clarity doesn't wait. That evening I received the first surprise. A text from an unknown number. Photo attached. Tessa, curled up on Julian's velvet couch wearing one of his old hoodies like a trophy. Her feet tucked up under her like she lived there. In the background, the liquor cabinet reflecting just enough light to catch a blurred image of Julian walking past. No caption. None needed. She wanted me to see her there. To know she had replaced me not quietly but smugly. I stared at the image for a moment, not blinking. Then I responded. You're wearing a man who just lost 60% of everything. Hope it fits. I never got a reply. But I didn't need one. Julian still didn't understand what I'd done. To him this was a tantrum. A warning shot. He didn't realize I'd already pulled the trigger. The lawsuit was more than a divorce filing. It included an official request for Julian's financial disclosures and a motion to trigger the conflict of interest clause in our prenup. The clause we wrote before the wedding. The clause that made any relationship with someone tied to my father, personal or professional, A breach. A clause Julian laughed off at the time. Now it would cost him over half of his holdings and dissolve key stock options in both his firm and Reed Enterprises. Not because I wanted the money. Because I wanted the message to be clear. He'd gambled on betrayal. And I was the dealer. My lawyer smiled as she clicked send on the first subpoena. Are you sure you want this in court? She asked. You know how this plays in the press. I'm counting on it, I said. I didn't need to speak to Julian to know how he was reacting. He'd be pacing, rattling legal pads, asking his assistant to check the clause again. There's got to be a way out. There wasn't. Because for the first time Julian Blake was on the wrong side of control. And Tessa? She stayed in his penthouse, playing the part of the wounded, misunderstood woman who just needed a place to stay. She told the press nothing, but I knew her better than that. She didn't care about silence. He cared about winning. She thought she was still ahead. She didn't see the floor cracking under her yet. I leaked a single surgical detail to the press. A receipt for a bracelet Julian bought weeks ago, complete with his handwritten note. For Tessa. You'll always be the one who understands. Published by High Court Life, tucked neatly under the headline, Gifts of the Guilty. Inside the lavish spending behind the Monroe-Blake split. The next day Julian's firm issued a rushed statement. The personal lives of our partners do not reflect company policy. Translation: we're trying to figure out how to distance ourselves before the investors start pulling out. That night, while Julian dealt with his hemorrhaging public image, I sat with my grandmother again. Both of us in silence, sipping tea under soft lamplight. You think they'll regret it? Asked finally. Eventually, she said. But it won't matter by then. I nodded. Good. Julian's last message came that night. You're going to destroy everything. I stared at it for a moment, then typed back. I already did. You just haven't looked down yet. I didn't hear from him after that. The message had gone quiet. No calls. No texts. No press releases. Which is exactly why I knew what was coming next. Julian had always been predictable in one way. He waited until the world stopped spinning before trying to clean the wreckage. And when he realized nothing he said from a distance would work, he did what all cowards do when they're losing. He showed up in person. It was just after 4 p.m. Late summer sun spilled across my grandmother's porch, casting long golden shadows across the ivy that curled up the railing. I was trimming the ends of her rosemary bush when I saw the black sedan crawl up the gravel path. Julian stepped out like nothing had changed, like we were just two people having a disagreement, not a betrayal scorched into headlines. He walked up the steps slowly. No flowers this time. No gifts. Just a stiff jaw and a look that almost passed for regret. Elena, he said, stopping a few feet from me. We need to talk. I stood still, shears in hand. There's nothing left to explain, Julian. Don't do that, he said, voice tense. Don't pretend I don't deserve a real conversation. I raised an eyebrow. Now you want real. After everything. He exhaled sharply, trying to keep his temper down. You blindsided me. The lawsuit, the press, the prenup clause. You acted like I was some stranger you wanted to ruin. I met his eyes. You're a stranger. The man I married never would have handed me a glass of wine from my stepmother on the day my mother died. He looked away, jaw tightening. You're still angry about that toast? That night. It wasn't malicious. It was just awkward timing. Awkward, I repeated quietly. You think forgetting the anniversary of my mother's death, the day you promised to honor with me every year, was awkward? I didn't forget, he said quickly. Things were busy. The IPO, the event. Tessa organized the whole thing. She organized it because you let her. You let her take control of a day that never belonged to her. He shook his head. I didn't mean for it to. You let her give a toast on that day, I said, voice steady. You let her raise a glass to herself in my mother's house, on the day I lit a candle for the woman who raised me. And you looked at me across that room like I was overreacting. He stepped forward, lowering his voice. I thought we were stronger than that. That was when I laughed. Not loudly. Just enough to feel how far the ache had traveled. You thought we were stronger than your silence. Than your cowardice. Than your willingness to protect the wrong woman, again and again. Elena, I was trying to keep peace. You and Tessa. There is no me and Tessa, I cut in. There's just me. And there's the woman you let manipulate you while you treated me like a liability. The wind rustled through the rosemary, sharp and fragrant. Julian looked smaller now. Not physically but somehow hollowed. He searched my face like he was still trying to find the version of me who might forgive him. But that woman was gone. "What happened to us?" he asked quietly. "You stopped protecting me," I said. "And I started protecting myself." He looked like he wanted to speak again, but the words didn't come. Just a twitch in his jaw. A clench in his hands. "You don't trust me anymore," he said finally. "I don't respect you anymore," I replied. That landed deeper than anything else. I saw it in his face, the way it cracked him open. Respect. That was always Julian's currency. More than love, more than power. He could beg for forgiveness. He couldn't live without being admired. No. I didn't admire him. I pitied him. And he knew it. He didn't try to argue. He just stood there for a long time, shoulders slumped in a way I'd never seen before. Then he nodded once, as if finally accepting that there was no salvage crew coming. "I guess I deserved this," he said. I didn't answer. As he did. He turned and walked back toward the car. For the first time in our entire marriage, he looked uncertain in his own skin. When the engine faded down the driveway, my grandmother stepped out behind me, silent until the dust settled. "You sure that's the end of it?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "He just doesn't know it yet." Julian never returned after that final conversation. No apology. No message. No surprise ambush at my grandmother's gate. For once he did the one thing I never thought he was capable of. He stayed away. Maybe he thought silence was noble now. Maybe he finally understood how much he'd broken. Or maybe, most likely, he was just waiting for the whole thing to quietly conclude, for me to quietly sign away 10 years of my life so he could move on and spin the PR his way. Let him try. The date was set. Neutral legal grounds, a white glass firm nestled in Midtown Manhattan, known for clean exits and non-disclosure packages that made headlines disappear. 11 a.m. sharp. I arrived at 10:40. I didn't bring anyone. No assistant, no cousin with a rage playlist, no legal entourage. Just me. That was enough. I wore a soft gray wool coat that fell below the knee, gold stud earrings and black flats. No makeup beyond concealer and mascara. Clean. Disarmed. Not there to perform, there to finish. The receptionist offered me lemon water. I declined. "Elena Monroe?" she asked. "Yes. Your party will be joining shortly." I smiled faintly. I imagine they will. The waiting room was cold in that polished modern way. White leather chairs. Chrome accents. The kind of silence that doesn't invite conversation. I sat by the window and looked out over the skyline, the same city Julian once told me he'd conquer. "One day this view will be mine," he'd said once, with an arm around my waist and a champagne flute in the other hand. No. This city didn't even look back. At 11:14 a.m. they arrived. Julian entered first, shoulders squared, tie slightly loosened. His coat was tailored, but it didn't sit right today, like even his posture had doubts. No folder. No flowers. No pen. Behind him, like a delayed echo, came Tessa. She wore white. A pressed, floor-length winter white coat with gold buttons and a silk scarf looped loosely around her neck. Her blonde hair was styled in those overly perfect waves, the kind that take 3 hours to look natural. Her sunglasses were oversized, her expression trembling just enough to suggest vulnerability. A full costume production. She stepped into the room like a grieving widow at a memorial for a man she never married. "Oh, I'm sorry," she whispered to the receptionist, her voice shaking theatrically. "It's just such a difficult day." She blinked rapidly, producing a single glistening tear that didn't quite fall. I stared directly at her. No emotion. No words. Just stillness. We were called into the conference room. High ceilings. Polished mahogany table. 2 folders placed exactly opposite each other. 3 pens. Water glasses. A decorative vase with sterile white orchids that looked allergic to warmth. Julian sat across from me. Tessa stood behind him, like some deranged bridesmaid waiting to catch a bouquet that never came. The lawyer began reading the terms, voice dry, flat, as if going through a standard process. Which it was. To him. I tuned most of it out. I already knew what was in the documents. I helped write them. What I listened for wasn't the legal language. It was the silence between Julian and me. He didn't speak. Didn't meet my eyes either. Just sat there with a furrowed brow, like a man realizing the map he'd followed had led him straight into a minefield. Tessa dabbed her eye again with a silk handkerchief embroidered with her initials. A detail I wouldn't have noticed if she hadn't exaggerated the gesture so painfully. She kept glancing at me, seeking attention, relevance, a reaction, and eventually she got one. Because when the lawyer paused to adjust the phrasing of a clause, Tessa leaned in slightly and whispered to me with a sweetness so artificial it could rot your teeth. "Don't worry, Elena. I'll take good care of what's left." It was like watching someone smile through a mask while holding a knife behind their back. I stood, calm, graceful, unbothered, and I slapped her. Once. Open palm. Clean contact. The sound cracked through the room like a pistol. She gasped, loud, dramatic, one hand flying to her cheek as if I'd fired a bullet. The assistant outside knocked on the glass in panic. The lawyer stood halfway from his chair. Tessa staggered back a step. And then I slapped her again. Harder. Right across the other cheek. For balance. "Are you insane?" she shrieked, eyes wide now. Not misty, not trembling, just feral. I leaned in slightly, voice low and steady. "No. I'm just finally done pretending you're worth speaking to." She stared at me, mouth open. Julian didn't say a word. He didn't get up. Didn't reach for her. Didn't scold me. He didn't even flinch. He just sat there, hands folded in front of him, watching. And for the first time I saw it in his eyes. He understood. He understood what he'd created by choosing her. He saw the woman sitting across from him, no longer the wife he could pacify with apologies and weekend trips, but someone sharper, colder, far more deliberate. He saw me and I saw the fear in his recognition. Not fear of violence. Fear of irrelevance. The lawyer finally cleared his throat. "Shall we continue?" I nodded, serene as ever, and sat back down. I picked up the pen. Black ink. No hesitation. Elena Monroe. Straight line. No loops. No flourish. No second thoughts. Julian signed next. His hands looked steadier than I expected, but I noticed the pause. That half-second stall before the pen touched the page. Like he knew this wasn't just a document. It was a death certificate. Not of a marriage. Of the version of me he thought would always wait. When it was done, I stood. Tessa was still holding her cheek, red blooming under her expensive concealer. I looked at her one last time. No malice. Just truth. "This wasn't revenge," I said quietly. It was restraint. Her eyes narrowed. I turned and walked out. The air outside was cold and clear. The street hummed with the late morning rhythm of New York. Taxis, laughter, impatient horns, lives moving forward. There were no reporters. No crowd. No press-staged performance. Just pavement, sky, and space. I didn't look back. Didn't need to. Somewhere behind me the final scene had ended. The actors were left standing on a darkened stage with no audience to clap for them. I reached the corner and paused. Breathed in. Felt the winter sun on my face. Then I smiled. Not because I'd won, but because I'd finally stopped playing their game. The divorce finalized 2 weeks after the signing. No headlines. No celebratory champagne. Just a discreet email confirming the filing was complete and the agreement had been sealed by the court. 10 years of marriage. Undone with a PDF. I didn't cry. I didn't feel much of anything. I had walked through the fire. What was left of me no longer burned. The news broke 2 days later. Raymond Reed, founder of Reed Corporation, arrested for securities fraud and misappropriation of investor funds. The article was brief, clinical in tone, but scathing in implications. The photograph showed Raymond in handcuffs, head lowered as he was escorted into a waiting black SUV outside his Westchester estate. His once prized cufflinks, platinum with tiny diamonds, glinted like iron shackles. By noon, Reed Corporation's stock was in free fall. By nightfall, the board had issued an emergency statement, distancing themselves from Raymond and promising a full internal audit. But the truth was simpler than any press release could admit. The empire was already rotten. Just needed the right push. And I had been pushing for a long time. 3 years to be exact. Long before Julian's betrayal, long before Tessa slipped her way into our lives with expensive smiles and fake laughter, I had already begun laying the groundwork. It started with whispers, questions in meetings, audits that didn't add up, files that mysteriously disappeared or got duplicated. Then came the subtle disobedience. A hiring freeze here, a failed product launch there, investor notes shuffled out of order, legal memos redirected to the wrong inboxes. I wasn't reckless. I was precise. They never suspected me. Why would they? To them, I was still the obedient daughter-in-law, the graceful hostess, the woman who planned galas and smiled quietly while Raymond took credit for my ideas. But I knew what was buried under the surface of that company. I knew the offshore accounts, the fake subsidiaries, the numbers that didn't balance no matter how you spun them. And while they were busy underestimating me, I was building my case. One file at a time. When I walked away from Julian, I didn't just walk away with my dignity. I walked away with documentation, signatures, board memos, and enough email chains to bury them all. I gave it to the SEC myself. I didn't need revenge. I just wanted the truth to finally matter. Raymond's arrest was only the beginning. Tessa's fall came next, and it was faster than I anticipated. Without Reed Corp propping up her lifestyle, the bottom dropped out in weeks. Her credit lines vanished. The country club cut her loose. Half her designer wardrobe was seized as frozen assets, pending investigation. The Manhattan condo she flaunted on social media was suddenly under bank control. And the best part? She couldn't even publicly play the victim. Because technically she had no legal standing. No marriage. No name on the assets. No protections. Just an expensive wardrobe and a sinking ship with her aboard. He came to me on a Friday. Unannounced. Uninvited. It was mid-afternoon. I was at the Monroe Foundation's city office, finalizing a grant approval for women in STEM. The receptionist buzzed through. "Elena, there's a Miss Tessa Reed here to see you. She says it's urgent." I didn't respond for 3 full seconds. Then calmly said, "Let her in." She looked nothing like the woman I'd last seen at the divorce signing. Gone was the pristine coat, the flawless makeup, the icy confidence. She looked brittle. Desperate. Her cheeks were drawn, eyes bloodshot, roots showing beneath her once glamorous hair. She clutched a worn leather handbag like it was all she had left. "Elena," she breathed. "Please." I didn't offer her a seat. She stumbled forward, hands trembling. "You have to help me. They've frozen everything. I have nowhere to go." "That sounds inconvenient," I said, voice cool. "I know what I did," she said quickly, eyes darting. "I know. I messed up. But I didn't know Raymond was doing that. And Julian, he's in hiding. He cut me off. I have no one left." "Good." She flinched. "Elena, I'm not asking for much. I need access to the condo. The Hamptons place. Something, anything." I tilted my head. "You think those are yours?" He swallowed. "They were gifts. I lived there. Temporary occupancy doesn't equal ownership. You know that, right?" Tessa's voice cracked. "I'm begging you." I let the silence stretch. "Then, you know what I remember most about you, Tessa?" She blinked. "That day at the lawyer's office. After 10 years of my marriage, 10 years of sacrifice and silence, you leaned in and said you'd take care of what was left. With that smug little smirk you always wore when you thought no one saw through you." Her face tightened. "Well," I said softly, "this is what's left." He stepped forward again, wild now. "I will go to the press. I will tell everyone what you did, how you set this up." I raised a hand and 2 of my private security guards stepped into the room. Both silent. Both massive. Tessa froze. "No one believes the woman who sold herself for monograms," I said quietly. "Especially not when she's got frozen assets and no press access." The guards flanked her. "Escort her out," I said simply. One of them touched her elbow. She jerked away but didn't resist. "Don't touch me," she snapped, but her voice broke halfway through. They led her out without a word. I watched until the door shut behind her. I stood there for a long moment. Not triumphant. Not smug. Just finished. It wasn't revenge. It was accountability. And maybe finally peace. Tessa's screams had barely faded from the hallway when my phone buzzed again. Another message. But not from her. This time it was Julian. "It's done. The IPO collapsed. I'm sorry. I'd still like to see you. Just once." I stared at the screen without blinking. There was no apology big enough. No collapse poetic enough. But the irony of it all made me pause. The timing, the desperation, the quiet request with nothing left behind it. I didn't respond. But I didn't block him either. 3 days later he showed up outside the Monroe Foundation building. Alone. Unshaven. His collar wrinkled, shoes scuffed. Nothing like the man who once stood beside me in tailored suits and shallow confidence. I saw him through the glass lobby doors. He waited for hours. I didn't go down. But I watched. When I finally agreed to meet him, I didn't do it for closure. I did it for the ghost of a woman I used to be, the one who once waited for him to remember something that should have mattered. We met at a quiet bench near the reservoir in Central Park, just before sunset. The sky was dusted in warm gold, but his presence brought no light. "Elena," he said when he saw me, rising too quickly like he wasn't sure I'd really come. I didn't greet him. I just sat. He took his place beside me and let the silence stretch between us. "It's all gone," he said eventually. "The IPO tanked the day after Dad's arrest hit the news. Investors pulled out. Shares plummeted. I tried everything. But the board dropped me this morning." I said nothing. He laughed bitterly. "The funny thing is, I think I was relieved." I still said nothing. "I kept thinking," he continued, voice rough, "about that night. The celebration. The toast. The birthday." He looked at me now, really looked. Julian's voice was quiet, almost broken when he finally said it. I knew. I turned to look at him, eyes steady. He didn't flinch. "I knew it was your mother's death anniversary that night," he said, his voice rough at the edges. "I remembered. I took you to Tessa's birthday. I stood there toasting her, laughing, holding her hand like it was just another night." He swallowed hard. Shame bloomed across his face like a bruise he couldn't hide. "I don't know what I was thinking," he whispered. "Maybe I wasn't thinking at all. Maybe some part of me believed you'd forgive me, like you always did. That you'd brush it off like the other times." His gaze dropped to the gravel at his feet. "I think I started taking you for granted without even realizing it. Little by little. I just assumed you'd always be there. That you'd wait for me to come around." He looked up again, and this time he looked wrecked. "I didn't even notice when I crossed the line. When I stopped being the man who protected your heart and became the one who chipped away at it." His voice cracked. His jaw tightened to hold it in. "I failed you," he said finally, barely above a whisper. "And I don't think I deserve your forgiveness. I just needed you to know I see it now. All of it." His eyes were glassy. But I didn't move. Silence. It lasted longer than he could handle. "I went to the cemetery," he added. "I wanted to see her grave. I wanted to stand where I should have been standing with you. I want to go back with you." He turned toward me, eyes pleading. "Let me go with you, Elena. Let me honor her. It's late, I know. But I'm here now." I turned to face him fully. And for the first time in months I spoke directly. "No." Just one word. His mouth parted in disbelief. I continued, voice low but steady. "You don't get to stand with me in grief. You stepped over to light someone else's candles." He flinched. "I didn't mean." "No, you didn't. That's the problem. You never meant to hurt me. You just forgot me. Bit by bit. Until there was nothing left to remember." He opened his mouth again, but I cut him off. "I used to think you were different from my father," I said. "But I was wrong. You didn't need to raise your voice or your hand to become him. All it took was your silence. Your absence when it mattered." His shoulders dropped. Not in anger. In defeat. There was nothing left to say. No letter. No grand apology. No broken IPO could rewrite what he'd erased of me. He stood slowly, the light behind him casting a long, thin shadow across the gravel path. "I never meant to become him," he said almost to himself. I didn't respond. I just looked out over the water, calm and glassy, reflecting a sky he was no longer part of. He left without another word. And I didn't look back. Some memories are better left buried. Even when they finally remember you. Too late. It happened suddenly. Tessa was running. Not metaphorically for once, but literally running down a rain-slick street in Midtown. 2 debt collectors had been following her since morning, and someone said she'd been trying to pawn a watch that wasn't hers. The car came from the left. Fast. Sharp turn. No chance to stop. They say it was instant. No pain. Just impact. Glass, pavement, silence. I didn't go to the funeral. There wasn't one. No one claimed her body for days. No statements from the Reed family, no obituary in the Times. Just a small article buried inside the fourth page of a gossip site. Tessa Vexley, former heiress, dies at 29. Once known for her tabloid presence and high-profile affair with Julian Reed, she had recently fallen out of the public eye following financial scandal and legal turmoil. And just like that she was gone. Like she'd never happened. Like her chaos hadn't once touched every corner of my life. I didn't cry. Not out of cruelty. Just clarity. Because grief needs presence. And Tessa had only ever been noise. Julian's fall came slower but just as final. After the IPO collapse, his reputation never recovered. No one in the industry wanted to touch a man whose father was in prison, whose girlfriend was dead, and whose wife had dismantled him without ever raising her voice. The press stopped calling. The last image I saw of him was a grainy photo. Julian leaving what looked like a midtown legal office, coat wrinkled, hair graying, head lowered. He wasn't worth the ink anymore. His world didn't explode. Emptied. The way power does when it's built on paper and denial. Me. I didn't rebuild. I rewrote. I still live in my grandmother's home, the one with creaky floors and hydrangeas along the fence. The neighborhood boys wave when they bike past. I know the name of the florist on the corner. I sleep with the windows cracked open now. I walk to work most mornings. The Monroe Foundation thrives, but I keep its growth quiet. We've opened 3 shelters, 2 after-school programs, and an internship pipeline for women who were once silenced like me, made small by men who used love as leverage and ambition as a leash. My mother would be proud. I used to wonder what justice looked like. Now I know. It looks like peace. On the first anniversary of my divorce, I took a slow walk to my mother's grave. Alone. I brought 2 white tulips and no expectations. I sat with her for a while. Told her everything. Or maybe nothing. Sometimes silence is the most honest conversation. The wind picked up gently. Not harsh. Not cold. Just present. The way real love is. The kind that asks nothing. The kind that stays. When I returned home that evening, my grandmother was waiting on the porch with 2 cups of tea and her old radio humming soft jazz. She smiled when she saw me. "You look like someone who's finally breathing her own air," she said. "I am," I replied, setting the flowers by the door. For the first time in a long time. We sat for a while in the hush of early evening, the sky slowly bleeding from gold to gray. No calls. No apologies. No letters I'd never sent. Just freedom. The quiet, steady kind you earn when you choose yourself and never hand your worth over again. They thought they'd taught me loss. I returned the lesson in full. The end.